Hello, for the Investing News Network, I'm Brian McGovern, Senior Editor, and today we're going to have a very fun conversation about the cannabis industry with two distinguished guests from Ernst & Young. Joining me today is Rami El-Cheikh and Fred O'Riordan. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Gentlemen, you recently put out a very fascinating study into the industry, some changes that you are foreseeing and some of the things that the industry needs to address in order to keep going forward in Canada. Before I ask you more about the study and the logistics and how that came to be, I think our audience would love to hear a little bit about your day-to-day, your role, and maybe how you guys work together to bring this study to light. Rami, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so again, thanks for having us, Brian. I'm a partner at the firm. I'm based in Toronto, and I'm responsible for building up our Cannabis Center of Excellence. So for us, that's an industry that's here to stay. It's here to grow. It's here to globalize, and we're committed to this industry. We understand it's facing challenges, but our role is to help support this industry and be part of its growth. So that's my role at the firm. Fred, over to you.
Thanks, Rami. So I'm the National Tax Policy Leader for EY Canada, located here in Ottawa. And I'm an economist by background, and so I do not only tax policy, but a lot of economic impact analysis as well on various sectors, including the cannabis sector, and it's always a pleasure to be working with Rami.
Absolutely. Okay, let's dive deeper into the study. Maybe can you take me behind the scenes? Tell me a little bit about the starting point for it, actually, the planning of it. How did it come to be?
Yeah, Fred, do you want to cover this question?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So, Brian, we were approached by the Cannabis Council of Canada, who were interested in engaging our services to do an analysis of the state. As our listeners know, the cannabis industry is a nascent industry, and it's gone through, some restructuring and some facing some challenges. And prime among them are the relationship between the industry's prosperity, the achievement of the government's stated policy goals behind legalization of recreational cannabis, and the industry's interest in working with government to ensure that these objectives are met.
I see. So when a third party comes to you with that interest in the industry, I'm wondering what are some of the steps that you take to build. You already have relationships in the industry, but to kind of build their perspective, their point of view, and then bringing your analytics, your business perspective, and all your great data.
Sure. So I'll just continue along with that. Because we're a professional services firm in the assurance business, the auditing business, when we're approached by a client, the first steps we take are jumping through some internal hoops, and that is to ensure that we have no conflicts in terms of independence issues and so on. And then there's some back and forth with the prospective client in terms of potential scope for the analysis, fees and costs, and timing and delivery, and so on. So those are all things that went, quite normally and smoothly with the Cannabis Council of Canada, or C3 as they sometimes call themselves.
That's right. Rami, from your expert perspective of the cannabis industry, maybe can you lay a bit of the groundwork of how the industry has presented itself right now in relation to the study, sort of how you're coming into the industry, viewing it before you prepare for a study like this one?
So I think for this one, we spent a lot of time with a number of stakeholders. And when I talk about stakeholders, we spent time with retailers, with licensed producers, with some consumers to try to understand at a high level and from a qualitative perspective, what are the key issues from the industry. But like Fred mentioned, our focus for the studies was specifically looking at the taxes and the excise duties. So we've taken all the context all the issues that we heard into context, but we focused on being objective and getting the data that provides information on the taxation for this exercise. So we basically had to look at across the cannabis value chain. We had to think about what is the markup structure from the product, from the day the product is created or manufactured from the licensed producer, all the way until it's in the hands of the consumer and they pay HST. So we had to look at the markup structure across the value chain and try to understand what are the dynamics there. We wanted to understand, once we had some good clarity on the government taxation, we wanted to understand, now that we have illegal cannabis products, now we understand how the taxation works and what are the markup structure. How does this legal product compare with contraband products? Are we competitive enough? Are we offering consumers the right thing? And that's the sort of analysis that we wanted to understand before we frame our future policy considerations. Fred, did I capture this appropriately, or do you have anything else?
I would only add, Rami, that we also looked at the regulatory structure of government as well. So it's not just the tax structure, but cannabis had sort of a unique relationship with government, in the sense that the government, when they legalized, they also decided that they wanted to recapture a lot of their regulatory fees by levying charges on the industry. So these operate essentially as taxes. I mean, I think Rennie captured it. You can view them as regulatory fees or taxes. In any event, they do add to the cost of doing business to the cannabis licensees.
I see. I see. Fred, maybe as a tax policy expert, can you bring some comparison points about sort of how you view the cannabis industry in Canada has paved its way in comparison with maybe other CPG industries? I know the cannabis industry is quite unique, but there's still some parallels with some other markets.
Well, I guess the closest parallels with the cannabis market in Canada in terms of tax policy would be alcohol and tobacco. They are taxed and to a large extent also regulated under the Excise Act 2001. And going way back in my previous life, I have to say I was a public servant for 33 years before joining EY. And among those roles, I was the Director General of Excise Duties and Taxes at the CRA. And during the 1990s, headed up a legislative review group that ultimately ended up in the modernized legislation for excise duties, the Excise Act 2001. So wine, spirits, tobacco, they are all covered under the statute. And so it was natural and no surprise that finance decided to tax them under the Excise Act 2001, which levies production levies on products, as opposed to the Excise Tax Act, which levies taxes at point of sale. So there are significant production controls around the products that fall under the Excise Act, largely because there's an interest in the government in preventing diversion of product into the contraband market. So cannabis has a lot in common with those other products in that sense, in a tax policy context.
I see. As you folks have mentioned, the cannabis industry in Canada has a unique relationship with the government. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the takeaways that you've had from this report about sort of the steps that the government, both at a federal level in Canada and at a provincial level, could take to actually come in and aid the industry of where it finds itself right now. Rami?
Yeah, I think what I'm gonna talk about the facts, Brian, and then I'm gonna ask Fred to comment on what could be considered for the future in terms of policy changes or considerations. But through our study, what we've learned is when you analyze the markup structure across the value chain, and if you take just Ontario as an example, government taxes and provincial markups are almost 47% of the price of the legal cannabis product. So that's a bit excessive, especially for an industry that's struggling. If you also take a look at how these products are priced compared to illegal products, you're going to see that we're not very competitive with the illegal market. We are in some product categories, but the price difference in specifically vape categories and edible products is significant between the legal product and the illegal product. And at the same time, when you look at the data, this industry has faced significant price compression. So we created a basket of cannabis product, and we've looked at the price of this basket in July 2019. So that was our index, which was around 100%. And then we've looked at the same basket of products in April 2022, and the value of this basket was about 60% of the value of July 2019. So significant price compression. Through the data as well, what we learned is that if you think about these cannabis companies, if you just take the representative top 10 cannabis companies, you look at their how they're performing financially. Well, their operating cash flows are all negative, and if you think about their market capitalization between 2019 all the way to 2021, the market cap is declining. So valuations are going down, investors are exiting, and for us, this was clear data that indicated that this industry needed help to survive, because the viability of this industry is at risk now. And we know a lot of cannabis companies are on the verge of bankruptcy. And that was the trigger point for us to say, we need to reconsider how we operate in this industry. We need to consider policy changes, and I'm going to let Fred comment on them.
So the other thing we looked at, I guess, in the study, for starters, was the objectives that governments wanted to achieve when they legalized cannabis, and there were three primary ones. They were to keep cannabis out of the hands of youth, to keep profits out of the pockets of organized crime, and to provide healthy, safe cannabis products for adults. And looking at whether those objectives have been achieved or not, we concluded that they had been achieved, but only to a certain extent. In other words, there was room for improvement in all three of those areas. And in all of those areas, it related directly to the problem with competitive pricing of contraband cannabis. The latter product, obviously, for that last objective of healthy cannabis for adult consumption, is at risk because of the unregulated nature of those products, and clearly contraband products, they're not asking age of majority cards from purchasers, so they're not preventing access by youth, and they are sold, among others, by organized crime. So in all three instances, that's really the issue, and it becomes what can government do to assist industry to rectify that situation, to gain more of the total market and reduce the extent of contraband in the market. In our study, we laid out a menu of possible policy options for both levels of government. As viewers know, cannabis is regulated at both levels of government and taxed at both levels of government. So among other things, we looked at the degree to which there's effective enforcement around the existing rules, and whether enforcement resources could be ramped up or penalties could be ramped up. Some of the regulatory issues around potency or advertising restrictions and so on. There, if people look at the report, you'll see there's quite a menu of options. Among them, of course, was the tax and regulatory burden. And that's the element in the report, I think, that our client, the Cannabis Council of Canada, focused on. I think in their view, that's where government could be of most assistance, and that's where, that's the source of their uncompetitive issue is the nature of the pricing. So as time has gone on, there has been price compression in the legal market as consolidation has taken place, and players are trying to be more competitive vis-a-vis contraband. But the problem is, as much as prices have fallen, tax and regulatory fees have stayed the same. And this is largely because of the nature of the way those taxes are applied under the Excise Act 2001. For the most part, there are specific taxes that are applied, not ad valorem taxes. So ad valorem taxes are a percentage of price. And so clearly, as price goes down, the tax share goes down as well. But with specific fixed levies, they don't. So, in a sense, as the prices have fallen, licensed producers' share of those revenues has fallen, but the government's has actually increased in proportion to the licensed producers. So in that sense, they feel they have a case to make to government to provide some tax relief, either on a rollback basis, permanently or temporarily. There are lots of different ways that relief could be provided to the industry, and really, it's up to government decision makers to look at this, analyze it, and see, in what ways they might choose to be helpful. That's part of a dialogue that'll be certainly be taking place.
Yeah, I see. I see. Thank you so much for that breakdown, Fred. I'm really curious, you guys, in conversations with lots of industry insiders and executives, I've had the chance to hear about the stories of dealing one-to-one with government agencies, uh, members of parliament, even things of that nature. And there's a growing sensation, I feel like, across the industry that following adult use legalization, the federal government at large has kind of put the industry away, not really discussed it on a major level. It's not a major political conversation surrounding the cannabis industry. And, I think it's fair to say that some of them may even feel a little, put away, put aside, shunned aside. Um, I'm wondering, in your conversations and your takeaways from this study, how do you view the current relationship coming from the government, both at the federal level and the provincial level, and the cannabis industry today?
Well, I'll take the first shot at that, I guess. I suppose what everyone has to recognize is that this is a public policy issue among many, many others. And at this particular time, I don't need to enumerate all of them, what government decision makers, both at the political and the officials level, are grappling with. We've got everything associated with COVID still. We have pretty significant price inflation in the economy. We've got international issues, the war in Ukraine and all of the spillover effects on Canada, and the demands for public funds at this point are fairly significant. So I'm not, I'm not making excuses for anybody. I do think that there is a valid case to be made by the industry in approaching both levels of government for assistance. But of course, you have to be realistic that these things take time and they compete with other priorities. Hopefully, solutions can be found, and the industry can be can flourish. I mean, that's in a sense, I mean, that the end game for government, it's the federal government that legalized the product, and they obviously have, the expression would be skin in the game, I guess, in terms of achieving those three objectives. And those objectives are going to be difficult to achieve unless the industry is competitive with the contraband market. One thing I would mention, when people look at this, I'm sure a lot of them think, well, when's the last time we saw a tax rollback or a tax reduction? That's highly unlikely to happen. But I could mention again, back in my own past experience in the 1990s in government, there was a parallel situation, a lot of similarities with tobacco. In the 1991 budget, federal budget, there was a significant increase in excise duties that was followed by matching increases at the provincial level. And that impact on price really triggered a significant response on the contraband market. There was a lot of tobacco smuggling that the older viewers out there like me would well remember. This went on for several years, and the contraband market actually took, in some places, Quebec and Ontario in particular, upwards of half the legal market. And so something had to be done, and it was done in 1994 through a coordinated tax rollback at the federal and provincial level. And that was needed because both governments share in the tax revenues from tobacco products, and if one provides relief, there's no assurance that the other one won't move into that vacated tax space and so on. So there has to be communication and coordination. And it did happen. And I mention that in part because the circumstances now are similar in the cannabis market. And there is already a mechanism for federal provincial coordination. That's how this whole tax and regulatory regime, the excise framework, was developed for cannabis products through coordinated effort on the part of both the provinces and the federal government. So the if you like, the bureaucratic infrastructure is in place. What really needs to happen is a decision that says, yes, this would help the problem, and yes, we're prepared to do something about it.
I hear you. Well, Rami, I'm curious from your perspective in dealing with folks in the cannabis industry and seeing it so close. You talked about the potential for bankruptcies, and I feel like the sentiment of desperation that is really coming across in the industry right now of asking for help from the government and wanting to have things change to combat unregulated producers and products. But can you paint a bigger picture about just how critical is this moment right now? And if changes aren't made in the next, let's say, 6 months to a year, year and a half, what could really happen to the Canadian cannabis industry?
I think what we're seeing, Brian, I think there's a lot of the industry is facing a lot of challenges. They're unable to raise capital to sustain their cash burns. And so what we're seeing, two things, there's a lot of consolidation right now happening between licensed producers, potentially to save on the cost of being a publicly listed companies and trying to identify synergies. So that's one approach. Targets that are not necessarily attractive for mergers are basically under a lot of risk if they're not able to raise capital right now, and it's very difficult. I think there's a lot of restructuring options that EY is helping a number of cannabis companies with to just cut costs, try to shrink to grow again into the future. Or if this path is not viable, there's a lot of other cannabis companies that are close to bankruptcy and will be filing very soon. So it's a very challenging time just because the capital markets conditions are not favorable at the moment.
I hear you. Well, gentlemen, we'll have to wrap it up there, but thank you so much both for your time and your great expertise.
Awesome. Thank you for having us again.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
No worries. And thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for even more expert interviews and our weekly news roundup. For the Investing News Network, I'm Brian McGovern, and we'll see you next time.